Vincent Caruso had buried 3 men who called him brother, and he had not shed a single tear at any of their funerals. So when his own wedding was arranged as a peace treaty between 2 families who had been killing each other's sons for 11 years, nobody expected him to feel anything at all, least of all Vincent. The bride was a stranger. Her name was Elena Marchetti, daughter of the man whose organization had murdered Vincent's uncle, and whose organization Vincent's men had bled dry in return. Elena did not speak. Not because she couldn't, but because for 6 years, since a car bombing that killed her mother and left her own throat scarred, she rarely chose to. The wedding was small. The reception was smaller. 2 families who hated each other sat at opposite ends of a ballroom, drinking the same wine, saying nothing they meant. Vincent watched his new wife from across the room. She wore white. She did not smile. She held her wine glass without drinking from it, and when photographers asked the couple to pose together, she stood exactly 1 careful foot away from him, close enough to look married, far enough to look like she wasn't. "She hates you already," said Dante, Vincent's cousin and closest advisor, leaning against the bar beside him. "She hates all of us. Can you blame her?" Vincent didn't answer. He was still watching Elena, who was watching the room the way Vincent's own soldiers watched rooms, cataloging exits, counting guards, memorizing faces. It was not the behavior of a frightened bride. It was the behavior of someone trained. That night, in the enormous bedroom of Vincent's estate, Elena sat on the edge of the bed fully dressed, staring at the door. Vincent entered, removed his jacket, and sat in the armchair across from her. "I won't touch you," he said. "Not tonight. Not until you want me to. Maybe not ever, if that's what you decide." Elena looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. "I know this marriage isn't about us," Vincent continued. "It's about stopping a war neither of us started. I don't need you to love me. I don't even need you to like me. I just need you to survive it." She reached for a notepad on the nightstand, wrote something, and turned it toward him. "Why do you care if I survive it?" Vincent looked at the words for a long moment. "Because I've buried enough people this year," he said quietly. Elena studied him. Then she wrote again. "Your uncle, my mother, whose fault was that?" "Both," Vincent admitted. "Neither. I don't know anymore. That's the point of stopping." She didn't respond to that. She simply turned off the lamp and lay down, as far to her side of the bed as the mattress allowed. Vincent slept in the armchair. 3 weeks passed. Elena remained silent, but not invisible. She learned the estate's routines faster than any new wife should have. She noticed which guards changed shifts at midnight and which changed at 2. She noticed that Vincent's brother, Marco, never looked directly at Vincent when Vincent wasn't looking back. She noticed that the household accountant, a nervous man named Salvi, flinched every time Vincent walked into a room, though Vincent never so much as raised his voice at him. Elena noticed everything, because noticing was the only power silence had ever given her. One evening, she found Vincent alone in his study, reviewing shipment ledgers by lamplight. She knocked on the open door. He looked up, surprised. She rarely entered his study. She held up her notepad. "Your brother is stealing from you." Vincent set down his pen. "Marco doesn't need to steal from me. Everything I have is already his if he wants it." "Not money," she wrote. "Information." Vincent frowned. "Explain." Elena hesitated, then wrote for almost a full minute, filling 3 pages while Vincent waited without interrupting. When she finally turned the notepad toward him, it detailed something Vincent had never considered. Marco had been meeting privately with Salvi twice a week for the last 2 months, always after hours, always when Vincent was traveling, and every time Vincent's men intercepted a Marchetti shipment recently, the timing had been suspiciously exact, too exact for luck. "You think Marco is feeding information to your father's people," Vincent said slowly, "even though the piece was his idea as much as mine." Elena nodded once. "Why would he sabotage his own piece?" She wrote 3 words. "Ask who benefits." Vincent sat back in his chair, turning that thought over. If the piece collapsed, if the Marchettis and Carusos went back to open war, someone would need to consolidate power quickly on the Caruso side, someone already trusted, already positioned, already beloved by the soldiers who'd grown tired of Vincent's caution. If the war restarts, Vincent said, almost to himself, and I don't survive it, Marco becomes boss. Elena didn't write anything. She didn't need to. Why are you telling me this? Vincent asked. You have every reason to want this marriage to fail. A war restarting would free you from me. Elena's pen moved slowly this time. I've buried enough people too. For the first time since the wedding, Vincent looked at his wife and saw not a stranger, not a hostage, not a political arrangement, but someone who understood exactly what he'd lost, because she had lost the same things, from the other side of the same war. He didn't act immediately. Vincent Caruso hadn't survived 20 years in this life by acting on a single piece of information, especially information from a wife he barely knew, whose loyalty to him was, at best, unproven. So he watched. He asked Dante to quietly track Marco's movements without revealing why. He reviewed the shipment logs Elena had flagged, cross-referencing them against dates Marco claimed to have been elsewhere. 3 days later, Dante confirmed it. Marco had met Salvi again, this time at a diner outside the city, at 11 at night, for 40 minutes. What do we do? Dante asked. Nothing yet, Vincent said. If I move against Marco now, on suspicion alone, and I'm wrong, I destroy my own family for nothing. If I'm right, and I move too soon, he'll know we're onto him and disappear before we learn who he's really working with. So we wait. We wait. Carefully. That night, Vincent returned to find Elena in the study again, reading one of his books uninvited. She looked up when he entered, and for the first time, she didn't immediately reach for her notepad. She simply raised an eyebrow, waiting. You were right, Vincent said, about the meetings. Elena set the book down. I need more, Vincent continued. I need to know who's giving Marco his orders, not just that he's taking them, and I think you already suspect who that is. She hesitated for a long time before writing. My father doesn't know either. Someone inside his organization is also acting alone. Someone who wants both families destroyed. She nodded. Any idea who? Elena wrote a single name. Renzo Bianchi. Vincent knew the name. Renzo had been a lieutenant in the Marchetti organization for 15 years, passed over for advancement twice, once when Elena's father chose a younger man, and once when the peace negotiations began, and Renzo's more violent methods fell out of favor. He wants the war to continue because peace makes him irrelevant, Vincent said. Elena nodded again, then wrote something longer. He approached me before the wedding, told me to convince you to trust Marco completely, said it would make things easier later. I didn't understand what he meant until now. You never told your father? I don't trust my father's judgment where Renzo is concerned. Renzo has been loyal to him for 15 years. My father wouldn't believe me over him, not without proof. So you came here silent, Vincent said, understanding now. Not because you couldn't speak, but because you were watching everyone, waiting to see who was lying, on both sides, before you decided who to trust. Elena didn't deny it. For the next 2 weeks, Vincent and Elena worked as something they had never expected to become, partners. Elena's silence, which everyone in both families had mistaken for grief or weakness, turned out to be the sharpest surveillance tool either family had. Nobody watched what they said around her, because nobody believed she was capable of doing anything with what she heard. Guards spoke freely in her presence. Marco's own wife, unaware of her husband's meetings, mentioned in passing that Marco had recently opened a second bank account Elena had never heard discussed at any family gathering. Elena wrote it all down for Vincent, page after page, night after night, and slowly, without either of them naming it, something began changing between them. Vincent started sitting closer during these late conversations. Elena started writing faster, more freely, sometimes forgetting to guard her words the way she guarded everything else. One night, after she'd finished detailing a new lead about Renzo's movements, Vincent said, "You could have let this war restart. You could have let Marco destroy me and gone home to your father a widow instead of a hostage." Elena wrote, "I thought about it." "Why didn't you?" She looked at him for a long moment before writing her answer. "Because for the first time in 6 years, someone asked me what I wanted instead of telling me what I was for. You did that on our wedding night. I didn't expect it from a Caruso." Vincent didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, and for once, the silence between them didn't feel like distance. It felt like the beginning of trust. The confrontation came sooner than either of them planned. Renzo, growing impatient with how slowly his plan was unfolding, decided to accelerate things himself. He contacted Marco directly, no longer through Salvi, and proposed moving the timeline forward, a staged attack on a Caruso shipment, made to look like a Marchetti betrayal, violent enough to reignite the war within days rather than months. Salvi, terrified of being caught in the middle and increasingly aware that Vincent's people were watching him more closely than usual, cracked first. He came to Vincent directly, sweating, apologetic, and told him everything: the meetings, the plan, the timeline. 2 days. The attack was set for 2 days from now. Vincent gathered Dante and 3 of his most trusted men that same night. Elena insisted on being present, and for the first time, Vincent didn't argue. "Marco is my brother," Vincent said, staring at a map of the shipment route spread across his desk. "I don't want to kill him. I want to understand why he was willing to burn everything down. Ambition doesn't need a reason beyond itself," Dante said quietly. Elena wrote something and slid it toward Vincent. "Ask him yourself, before Renzo's men arrive. Give him a chance to stop this." Vincent looked at his wife. "You want me to warn him?" She nodded. "He's been selling information about my movements for months. He could have gotten me killed a dozen times over." "He could have," she wrote. "He didn't. Whatever this is, I don't think it was ever really about wanting you dead. I think it's about wanting to matter. Ask him." Vincent found Marco alone in the estate's garage 2 hours later, checking the oil in one of the cars, an unremarkable task for a man supposedly plotting a war. "I know about Salvi," Vincent said, without preamble. "I know about Renzo. I know about the shipment in 2 days." Marco froze, one hand still on the dipstick, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. "How long have you known?" he finally asked. "Long enough that if I wanted you dead, you already would be." Marco set the dipstick down slowly. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. Renzo said it would just be leverage, information to keep the peace from collapsing too fast in either direction, so both families would need people like us to manage it. You didn't think it would turn into an actual attack?" "No. Why did you start at all, Marco?" Marco leaned against the car, and for the first time in years, Vincent saw something in his brother's face that looked almost like grief. "Because you never needed me for anything real. You have Dante for strategy. You have soldiers for muscle. You have a wife now who apparently sees more than any of us combined. What do you need a brother for, Vincent, except to stand behind you at funerals?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "I needed you to tell me that, instead of selling information to a man who wanted us both dead." "Would you have listened?" "I don't know," Vincent admitted, "but you never gave me the chance to find out." Marco's shoulders sagged. Whatever resolve had carried him this far seemed to leave him all at once, replaced by something closer to exhaustion. "What happens now?" "Now you help me stop Renzo before his men reach that shipment," Vincent said, "and then we figure out the rest, together, the way we should have from the beginning." The ambush, when it came 2 nights later, went differently than Renzo had planned. Vincent's men were waiting at the shipment route an hour before Renzo's people arrived, forewarned by Marco himself, who had insisted on being there to prove where his loyalty finally stood. Renzo, expecting an unguarded convoy and a clean trigger for renewed war, instead walked into a standoff he had no way of winning. He didn't survive the confrontation. Neither did 2 of his men. The rest surrendered, and within them, information surfaced confirming what Elena had suspected. Renzo had been planning this for over a year, patiently cultivating resentment inside both organizations, waiting for a moment weak enough to exploit. He had found it in Marco's quiet bitterness and Salvi's fear, and he very nearly succeeded. Elena's father, informed of everything by morning, was furious at Renzo's betrayal, and, quietly, deeply relieved that his daughter had been the one to prevent a war neither family actually wanted. He said little about it directly, but he sent Elena a single letter a week later, which she read alone and never showed to Vincent, though she did tell him, in her own careful handwriting, that her father had finally apologized for something that happened a long time before any of this began. Marco was not punished the way tradition demanded. Vincent could have ended him for what he'd done, and everyone in the organization expected it. Instead, Vincent gave his brother something harder: real responsibility, real trust, rebuilt slowly and deliberately, starting with small things and growing only as Marco proved himself again and again. It took over a year before the old ease between them fully returned, but it did return, piece by piece, the same way trust always rebuilds, slowly, and only through consistent proof. As for Elena, she began speaking again, not all at once, and not entirely, but in small moments, usually late at night, usually only to Vincent. Her voice, when he finally heard it fully for the first time, was quieter than he expected, and steadier than he had any right to hope for. "Why now?" he asked her, months after the confrontation with Renzo, sitting together in the same study where she had once written her first warning to him. "Because you're the first person who let me choose when to use it," she said. "Everyone else either wanted me silent because it was convenient, or wanted me speaking because it made them feel like they'd fixed something broken. You just waited. I would have waited as long as it took." "I know," she said. "That's why I stopped waiting." Years later, when people spoke of the peace between the Caruso and Marchetti families, they credited treaties, they credited Vincent's caution, they credited the deaths of men like Renzo Bianchi who had tried to burn it all down. Few people ever knew the truth, that the peace had actually been held together in its most fragile hour, by a woman everyone assumed had nothing to offer, because she had chosen, for 6 long years, not to speak. Silence, it turned out, was never her weakness. It was the only weapon nobody in either family had ever thought to guard against, and it saved them all. Vincent kept one memory from that year closer than any other, closer even than the night Marco confessed in the garage, closer than the standoff that ended Renzo's ambitions for good. It was a smaller moment, one nobody else ever knew about. A few weeks after the ambush, Elena found him standing in the same ballroom where they had married, empty now except for the two of them. Staff long since cleared the tables away and gone home. "Why are you in here?" she asked, her voice still new enough that it startled him every time he heard it. "I keep thinking about that night," Vincent said. "How far apart we stood for the photographs. How certain I was that this marriage was just another line item in a treaty, something to manage rather than something to live. And now? Now I can't remember the last time I thought of you as a line item." Elena crossed the room slowly, the way she used to cross rooms when she was still cataloging exits and counting guards. Except now there was nothing to count, nothing to guard against. She stopped exactly where she had stood for their wedding photos, one careful foot away from him, and for the first time, she closed that distance herself. "I used to think silence was the only thing I had left after the bombing," she said, "something that couldn't be taken from me, because I'd already given it up voluntarily. But you never tried to take it. You let me keep it, until I didn't need it as armor anymore." "I didn't do anything," Vincent said. "I just waited. That was the thing nobody else ever did for me," she said. "Everyone in my life either needed me broken so they could protect me, or needed me fixed so they could stop feeling guilty. You just let me be exactly as much as I chose to be, every single day, and somehow that was the thing that finally healed." Vincent didn't answer right away. Outside, the estate was quiet, the kind of quiet that no longer felt like a battlefield holding its breath. It felt, for the first time in either of their lives, like peace they had actually earned, rather than peace enforced by treaty and fear. "For what it's worth," he finally said, "I would marry you again. Even without the war, even without either family demanding it." Elena almost smiled, not the practiced, guarded almost smile she'd worn at the wedding, but something real, something that reached her eyes the way nothing had in 6 years. "Ask me properly sometime," she said, "and maybe I'll say yes twice." Years later, their children would grow up hearing 2 very different versions of how their parents met. The official version, told at family gatherings, spoke of treaties and diplomacy, and 2 powerful families choosing peace over pride. But late at night, when it was just the 4 of them, Elena would tell the real version, the one about a woman who chose silence as a shield, and a man who chose patience as a gift, and how between the 2 of them, they had quietly saved everyone who never even knew they needed saving.